"Why aren't you eating dinner?" my father-in-law asked, seeing us for the first time in a long time for New Year's. He must have noticed that there was only enough food at the dining room table for 3. "It happens all the time." "What?" My father-in-law looked curiously across the table at my mother-in-law and husband. "What exactly do you mean by it happens all the time?" "A daughter-in-law who can't give her mother-in-law grandchildren would have to be a slave, wouldn't she?" My mother-in-law responded casually while chewing on the hamburger steak I had made. "That's right. Ruby is our slave. She stays in the kitchen to take care of us while we eat," my husband chimed in, echoing his mother's sentiment. As expected, he continued, "He took me to his mother's every weekend to help her with housework, even though you couldn't give her grandchildren. I'm letting you stay here. You should appreciate her and do the best you can for my mom." I didn't want to go to my in-laws' house, but I had made a commitment. Even if I refused to go, my husband would verbally force me. He knows I have a short temper and difficulty finding my words. "Mom, I brought a slave. He even greeted me that way recently." "What are you talking about?" My father-in-law seemed offended by the way my mother-in-law and husband referred to me as a slave. "That's not how a normal family with children behaves. Ruby, it's not your fault. You should stop bullying her." "What do you mean? You're the one that lives so far away, so stay out of the problem," my husband snapped back. "That's right, Dad. Don't tell me what to do. You didn't have to watch Mom lose the possibility of having grandchildren," my mother-in-law added, with a tone that sounded like they were mocking my father-in-law. I tossed the coffee beans in the grinder while listening to their conversation. My mother-in-law and husband always ordered me to bring them coffee as soon as they finished eating. I was so busy with shopping for my mother-in-law that I only had time to eat a piece of sweetbread earlier. "Come on, I'm hungry too. I'm not sure what I'm doing," I muttered to myself as if escaping from the grinder's blade. A single coffee bean fell to the floor. "My name is Ruby, and I'm a 37-year-old housewife. During the weekday lunch hours, I work part-time in the kitchen of a family restaurant. My husband and I rent an apartment. I used to work at the same local bank as my husband, but I left 3 years ago to focus on fertility treatment. We were unable to have children, so we sought medical attention and were told that the problem was on my side. After a year of treatment, I was told that it is impossible for me to get pregnant. My mother-in-law and husband changed shortly after that. Originally, we were both working and managing our own income and budgets. When I decided to leave my job, my husband took on the responsibility of covering our living expenses. He managed our savings, paid the bills for rent and insurance, and started giving me a monthly allowance. At first, we were able to live comfortably on $1,000 a month. However, when we stopped pursuing fertility treatments, my husband suggested we could save money. "Since we don't have fertility treatments anymore, you can save money," were his first words after we made the decision to stop trying to conceive. "Because of the financial burden of the treatment, I've been giving you more money for living expenses, but you don't need it anymore. You can go back to work if you want," he'd added. True to his word, he gradually reduced the amount he gave me, first $800, then $600, and eventually $500 a month. There was a time when I desperately tried to find work, but even then, my mother-in-law interfered. "Working as a full-time employee is not good for a wife," she asserted. "If you don't share the housework, she will divorce you." "So you're saying I shouldn't work?" I questioned. "Of course, if it's only part-time, then fine. You need to devote yourself to Carl and serve me. You can't even have grandchildren, so it's the least you can do," she replied. Despite enduring painful treatments, I couldn't conceive. My mother-in-law's attitude towards me changed drastically. She'd call me frequently, asking me to run errands, and I worked every weekend at their house. No matter what I did, she found fault and complained incessantly. "Why are you folding laundry like that? Why not put the corners together and fold it correctly and neatly? Do it again," she'd scold, even throwing the laundry onto the floor once. It seemed like she relished in hurting me. One evening after dinner, my father-in-law noticed my distress and offered to take me out for a drink. "I'm going out for a drink. Do you want to join me?" he asked, showing concern for my well-being. His kindness touched me deeply, and I couldn't help but cry. "I saw that, and if you want, you can vent to me," he reassured. He took me to a local bar where we sat across from each other, sharing a beer and a whiskey soda. As we ordered mixed nuts and a salad, his compassionate presence was a welcome relief from the turmoil at home. I could tell Elizabeth and Carl were being rude to you, my father-in-law began, taking a sip of beer. He listened attentively as I poured out my grievances about how his wife and son had treated me since I stopped fertility treatments. I'm blamed for not being able to have children and am forced to run errands, I confided. My husband wouldn't let me work full-time, and he's reduced my living expenses since we stopped the treatments. Now, he only gives me $500 a month. What I hate most is being called a slave, I continued. Elizabeth is not happy unless she gets her way. She wasn't like this before, but she became selfish after having Carl. She would yell at me so much that I began to dislike her, and now we pretend to be a happy couple. Do you think it's because he doesn't want to be with me? I'm jealous my father-in-law has a place to escape to, I admitted. You're not tough enough to make yourself heard, he observed. Yeah, but venting to you makes me feel better, I admitted gratefully. Good, that makes me happy, he said before we had one more beer and one more whiskey soda before leaving the restaurant. However, as soon as we arrived back home, the situation escalated. I'm back, I announced as I opened the door, only to find my mother-in-law and husband standing there. Dad, did you have a night out with my wife? My husband questioned, eyeing both of us. What? I just invited Ruby for a drink, my father-in-law clarified. What kind of relationship is this that you can go out for drinks together? My mother-in-law interjected angrily. Just like your husband said, I retorted, feeling the tension mounting. What are you thinking, Ruby? Isn't it wrong for a wife to go to a bar with a man? You can't give me grandchildren, but you still have desires, my husband accused, joining in the finger-pointing. Enough. A powerful voice echoed as if thunder had struck. My father-in-law was enraged, staring down Carl and Elizabeth. What is it with you? All I wanted was for Ruby to relax, he thundered, his anger palpable. The rage sped up my heart rate, I thought, noting the intensity of the moment. Mild men or people can become more difficult to deal with when injured, I mused, watching Elizabeth shudder at her name being called. Was she scared of him, or did she have something to hide? You said what kind of relationship do you have with your father-in-law that you go out drinking together? My husband challenged. That's my daughter-in-law is treated like a slave, and I took her to get her mind off it. That's what happened because of Ruby, my father-in-law clarified, cutting through the tension with his explanation. I can't have grandchildren, my mother-in-law's accusation hung in the air, a barb aimed directly at me. The words ignited a desire to yell, to defend myself against her constant blame for not providing her with grandkids. How can you say that when you hate children? I wanted to retort, but I bit my tongue. Yet even in my silence, I couldn't shake the urge to challenge her unfair judgment. Well, grandchildren are different than other children, aren't they? I finally spoke up, my voice edged with frustration. That said, I don't think you wanted grandchildren enough to treat Ruby like this. You're just making an excuse to point the finger at her. My mother-in-law seemed about to respond, but then she abruptly averted her gaze. Was she tongue-tied or perhaps fearful of her husband's reaction? Carl, wait, my attention shifted to my husband. I heard you only give Ruby $500 a month for living expenses. Do you keep the rest of your salary? I probed, unable to ignore the discrepancy. No, I pay rent and insurance, he countered, but his evasive response left room for doubt. As the silence stretched, he seemed unable to conjure a convincing explanation. I came here to discuss our future. Let's get right to it, my father-in-law intervened, leading us to the living room. What do you mean discuss our future? Just sit down, my mother-in-law commanded, her tone imperious. Make some coffee first, Ruby, she ordered, her words laced with condescension. But my father-in-law's sharp rebuke cut through the air. Don't tell her what to do. I complied silently, sensing the tension crackling around me. As the coffee brewed, my father-in-law resumed speaking, his tone authoritative. I'll be retired in a few years after my current assignment ends. I won't be living with you anymore. The revelation left my husband and mother-in-law stunned. What do you mean? They both protested in unison. We've been masquerading as a couple for years, so we no longer need to live together, my father-in-law explained calmly. I'll live where I want, and you can stay here. But my mother-in-law's panic was palpable. That's fine, but I changed my mind after you accused me of being unfaithful earlier, she protested, rising from her seat. I'm selling the house, Elizabeth. I'll leave you nowhere to live. Her announcement sent shockwaves through the room. Why don't you just get a place to live? My father-in-law suggested. but her response was desperate. How am I going to do that? I can't pay the rent. Get Carl to help you, my father-in-law suggested, unaware of the financial strain. He only gives her $500 a month. I'm sure he can pay for you. But my husband's nervousness betrayed him as he struggled to respond. That's not possible, he stammered, his discomfort evident. We don't have any money. If I do that, I won't be able to pay Mom's debt. The revelation hung in the air, casting a shadow over the room. You just mentioned debt, didn't you? My father-in-law's tone turned grave. Explain. I didn't mean what I said. I said explain. My father-in-law's voice thundered through the room, his anger palpable. My mother-in-law dissolved into tears at the sound of his fury, but his rage remained unabated. Mom owes me $50,000. I'm her co-signer, my husband confessed, his expression resigned. Around the time we stopped fertility treatment, Mom made an investment. She made some money at first, but then the stock market crashed, he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. You mean you lost money in the stock market and went into debt? I interjected, incredulous at the revelation. I used family funds. At the time, we were betting on stocks that were supposed to go up, but eventually we ended up in debt. Now, I'm paying it with my salary and Mom's repaying it by working part-time at a supermarket, my husband explained, his tone heavy with the weight of their financial burden. The news caught me off guard. I had never heard anything about stocks or debt. My mother-in-law had lost a significant amount of money in the stock market and had borrowed to compensate for it when I stopped fertility treatment. She must have tried to repay the debt by investing in stocks that were expected to rise. But as they struggled with repayment, those stocks failed to yield returns. Maybe. I couldn't help but voice my thoughts. That's also when you and Carl began treating me like a slave. Ruby, what are you trying to say? Were you just taking it out on me? My mother-in-law challenged, her voice strained. The slave treatment started around the time I stopped fertility treatments. I doubt it's because she wanted a grandchild so badly. But the simple answer is that she was taking it out on me because that was satisfying. I countered, the bitterness evident in my tone. As expected, my mother-in-law remained silent, her guilt hanging heavy in the air. And Carl used the money that he took out of my monthly expenses to pay off his debts. He could save money because there's no fertility treatment. He didn't give me less money for some strange, unknown reason. He just needed the money to repay his mom's debt. I concluded, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. You stupid idiot. Finally, my father-in-law erupted, his frustration boiling over. Even if it's family money, it's money. I worked for and saved for you, only for you to invest it in stocks without consulting me. To top it all off, you lost it all. What the hell kind of money are you spending? My father-in-law exploded, his frustration boiling over. With those words, he abruptly left the room, as if struck by a sudden realization. We all followed him, wondering what he was up to. What are you doing? My husband questioned as we trailed behind him. Show me Elizabeth's stuff. I'll check what she's buying, my father-in-law demanded, his tone sharp. Stop, Elizabeth cried, her voice tinged with panic, but her husband paid her no heed. He swung open the closet door, revealing a trove of luxury handbags. Rudy, are these bags expensive? They're all luxury items costing over $1,000, my father-in-law remarked, his tone incredulous. As he opened a small drawer in the corner of the closet, an array of accessories greeted our eyes, rings, necklaces, and earrings, some adorned with diamonds, rubies, and other precious stones. Picking up a ring, I noticed the engraving indicating it was made of 18-karat gold. Elizabeth, you bought all these expensive things without telling me? My father-in-law's disappointment was palpable. I'm sorry, but Elizabeth began, but her husband cut her off with a look of disgust. All this spending, investing in stocks without my permission, and treating Ruby like a slave. Divorce. I want a divorce, and I won't take no for an answer, he declared, his voice resolute. But how am I supposed to live? Elizabeth protested, her voice trembling. Talk to Carl. I'll sell this house and land immediately. You can sell these bags and jewelry to pay for the move, my father-in-law retorted, leaving Elizabeth speechless. My husband, no longer wearing his arrogant demeanor, nodded silently, his gaze averted. The next day, my father-in-law presented 2 sets of divorce papers. Here, Ruby. If you want to file for divorce too, he offered, handing one to me. I glanced at my husband, who sighed and turned away. Of course, I wanted a divorce, but more importantly, we wanted alimony from these people. That night, as I lay awake, I pondered the events of the past years. How long had I suffered in silence? What did I want now? I had once yearned for a child, enduring agonizing fertility treatments, only to realize I couldn't conceive. I continued my story, holding back the tears welling in my eyes. All the painful tests and treatments I endured in hopes of becoming a mother seemed futile now. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't have a baby. As I grieved, Carl informed me that since I no longer needed fertility treatment, he would reduce my living expenses. "What are you saying? This is all Carl's fault," Elizabeth interjected, her voice sharp. My father-in-law's horror was palpable, and my mother-in-law fell silent, her accusations hanging in the air. She had blamed me for not giving her a grandchild and then treated me like a slave. "Do you know how hard it was for me?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. Naturally, there was no response from Elizabeth or Carl. In the end, Carl's actions were driven by his need to pay off debts, while Elizabeth sought an outlet for the stress of financial losses in the stock market. "I want you to reimburse me for this," I declared, my voice firm. "What if I say I won't pay?" Carl retorted defiantly. "Sure, I'll talk to my lawyer," I shot back, my resolve unwavering. After the new year, my father-in-law officially divorced my mother-in-law. Within days of putting his house on the market, he found a buyer who intended to tear down the old house and clear the land to build a new one. Left with nowhere to stay, my mother-in-law moved into a rundown apartment, barely holding together. She now resides with my ex-husband, struggling to make ends meet while paying off their debts and alimony to me, a financial burden I'm sure weighs heavily on them. Meanwhile, I found solace in a beautiful little apartment and secured a clerical job at a security company, thanks to my father-in-law's support. He encouraged me to utilize my accounting knowledge and skills from working at a bank. "I want you to be happy. If you ever need help, just tell me anything," he reassured me, his unwavering support a beacon of hope. With my father-in-law by my side, I embarked on this new chapter, determined to shine on my own. As I dressed for my first day of work, I made a promise to myself to embrace this fresh start and forge my path to happiness. Waking up to the presence of an ignoramus in the morning was akin to inhaling poison that would linger throughout my workday. Each sunrise brought with it the burden of enduring the condescension of an elite chief, a product of some lofty institution of higher learning. On a particular day, my tolerance reached its breaking point. "Perhaps you should escalate your grievances to our superiors," she taunted. "After all, I belong to the cream of society. Nobody will heed the complaints of a dropout like you." Her smugness was palpable, but a single encounter with the passing company president swiftly altered her demeanor. "Good day, I'm Daniel Smith," he introduced himself. "I landed a sales position at this company's branch straight out of high school. My father's motorcycle accident left him incapacitated, rendering him unable to provide for our family. So I opted to forgo college and joined the workforce to support them, thanks to a referral from my father." The camaraderie among the employees at this company made each workday a delight. My boss is kind, and my coworkers are a breeze to work with, so work-related stress rarely crosses my mind. Yet today, I can't shake off this feeling of melancholy. "Smith, isn't your meeting today with the head office?" a colleague inquired. "Yeah, it is." "Seriously, that means they'll be here, right? I should have taken the day off." "You don't interact with them directly, so just keep it to yourself. I'm already feeling down this morning." Before my colleague could continue, they abruptly changed the topic. "Why was nobody at the entrance to greet me? I was expected, and this is how they welcome me," they grumbled. "Forget it, let's just get to work," they muttered, then hurried away. "Remember that backstabber?" a disgruntled voice, now left with me, seethed. "This place is full of ingrates. It's infuriating that I have to bend over backward just to communicate with them. I sincerely apologize. I didn't anticipate your early arrival." She's Manager Jones, frequently commuting from headquarters for meetings and such. With a degree from a prestigious university, she was recruited as a seasoned executive candidate. Unfortunately, her demeanor often veered into arrogance, belittling employees at the subsidiaries. "They're all just typical uneducated incompetents," she'd sneer, making me look like a fool. "Let's just get this over with. Could you kindly wait a bit longer for another key person to join us? They're en route." "What? You expect me to wait?" My role is to hit the ground running upon arrival from headquarters. This incompetence is beyond belief. I deeply apologize. You're here 20 minutes ahead of schedule, yet you're being unreasonable. I yearned to retort, but the person on the other end was from the head office, an elite recognized by headquarters. I hesitated, unsure of the repercussions if I dared to challenge her authority. We grumble amongst ourselves at the subsidiary, but when it comes down to it, we never confront them, always enduring silently. As I carried on with my usual routine, driving to work one morning, I noticed an elderly lady in distress crouched in the middle of the road. It was clearly an emergency, but those around me either avoided involvement or didn't know how to react, feigning ignorance as they passed her by. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I rushed to her side, but she couldn't respond. Her breathing was labored, and she struggled to speak. "I'm calling an ambulance right away," I announced, swiftly dialing 911. Once the ambulance arrived, we all accompanied the elderly lady to the hospital. "It's all right for you to head home," the nurse reassured us. "We'll take care of her until her family arrives." Having already informed the company of my tardiness and concern for the grandmother's well-being, I opted to stay until her family showed up. Thankfully, her condition wasn't critical, and she was discharged after a few days. We breathed a collective sigh of relief. Then, a few weeks later, out of the blue, I received a transfer order to the headquarters branch office, a directive straight from the president. Contemplating the move, a colleague offered their perspective. "It's a testament to your hard work being recognized. Embrace it and give it your all." Encouraged by their words, I resolved to accept the transfer. My first day at headquarters proved to be quite the whirlwind. Deciding to greet each department individually, I encountered the chief in the corridor and hastened to offer my greetings, but she caught sight of me and shot me a disdainful glance. "What brings you here? Aren't you a bit out of your element?" "Good morning, Chief. I've been reassigned here." "Oh, you're being relocated. What on earth are they thinking?" Disregarding my greeting, the chief launched into a tirade. "Starting my day by sharing airspace with an uneducated imbecile is a surefire way to ruin my entire workday. I apologize if I've inconvenienced you, Chief. Please spare me the pleasantries. Just steer clear of me. I'm busy. Don't get in my way." Clearly in a foul mood, the chief dismissed me with a wave of her hand, as if shooing away bothersome insects. It was evident that any further attempt at conversation would be futile, so I resigned myself to returning to my duties. As I returned to the floor where the chief was, I overheard her berating her subordinate. "You're incompetent. How can you mess up something so simple? Even a new recruit could handle this." "I apologize, colleague." The employee, visibly distraught over her mistake, clenched her fists, lowered her head, and endured the scolding. "If this is how it's going to be, I'd rather have someone else working for me than you. You're no longer of any use to me. Clear out your desk and get out of my sight." With those cutting words, she turned to face me, our eyes meeting. Already discontented, her expression soared further as she glared at me. "Didn't I tell you to stay away from me this morning? Please, Chief, hear me out. I have something to discuss with you today." "Enough. Everyone here is arrogant. I don't have time for incompetent fools like you." With those words, the chief stormed out of the room, slamming the door with all her might. Concerned, I approached the employee who had just faced the chief's wrath, wincing at the resounding crash of the door. "Is this typical of the chief's behavior?" I inquired. According to the employee, it wasn't just typical, it was a daily occurrence. "She's always disrespecting me," he lamented. Worried that the chief might overhear, he hushed me, cautioning, "Shh, she might hear you." Aware of the potential consequences if the chief caught wind of his complaints, I did my best to soothe his frustration. "I've endured this for too long," he confided, shuffling to his desk and retrieving a white envelope from a drawer. "Please don't tell me that's a resignation letter," I implored. "Unfortunately, that's exactly what it was," he confirmed, something he'd been contemplating for some time. "At my previous workplace, every day was serene and fulfilling. But ever since the chief arrived, it's turned into a nightmare," he lamented, tracing the surface of his desk with a heavy sigh. The clutter of documents and notes bespoke his dedication to his job, despite the upheaval. "I understand your frustration. It's disheartening to see your hard work undermined by just one person, the chief. I sympathize. You've poured your heart into this job, longer than she's been here, and you've excelled." But his frustration hung palpably in the air, with no outlet in sight. The chief might say otherwise, but there are surely colleagues who trust and rely on you. Stay a bit longer for their sake. I'll help shoulder the burden. You're not the one who should walk away, I encouraged. What do you mean? He queried, his curiosity piqued as I made my way to confront the chief, leaving him pondering behind. We can't allow any more employees to be mistreated like him. That's why I'm here, I declared, trailing after the chief until I found her in the break room, sipping tea. Mind if I join you? I inquired. The chief glanced up, her expression pained. You're still here. You're as persistent as a fly. I'm just trying to take a break. Please give me some space, she sighed wearily, likely drained from the recent confrontation. Summoning my courage, I addressed her firmly. Chief, I'll be conducting a thorough investigation into your treatment of our employees. Depending on the findings, appropriate actions will be taken. My direct statement caught the chief off guard. What are you implying? Are you trying to play the hero to shield incompetence? No, that's not my intention. Why don't you go run to your superiors with this? I'm an elite, you know. I have the backing of those above. Nobody will pay heed to a dropout like you from the subsidiary, she retorted dismissively, waving her hand as if to brush off the matter. Suddenly, a man emerged from the other side. Smith, there you are. How's everything going? It was the president. I'm doing my best, thanks to your support. Ah, hello, Mr. President. What a pleasant surprise to see you here. What happened to the grumpy chief from earlier? She's putting on a facade of excellence for those higher up the chain. I'm glad to hear you're thriving. Have you connected with the new branch manager? Huh? What new branch manager? The chief looked puzzled, her gaze unfocused. He's standing right in front of you. Hadn't you been briefed? The president chuckled. This inept employee from a subsidiary company. You're quite the comedian, boss, the chief scoffed, joining in the laughter. The president, however, regarded her with suspicion. What are you talking about? Are you suggesting I'm joking? Understand this. He's now the brand manager of this branch office. It's impolite to label him incompetent, the president admonished. What on earth? The chief shot me a scowl. You didn't bother to inform me earlier, did you? I've already informed the rest of the department. Oh dear, such a rude and ill-informed individual. The chief's face flushed with anger, and she looked on the verge of collapse. Observing the situation with reluctance, the president finally spoke up. Let me shed some light on this remarkable opportunity. This company belonged to his father. Due to a car accident injury, his father couldn't manage it, so I took over. Is he the former president's son? The chief inquired. That's correct. I've been urging him to relocate to headquarters, but he's quite adamant about staying put, the president explained. I apologize. I have a fondness for that place, and I found it satisfying, I replied. What prompted your unexpected arrival here? Why didn't you just continue at the subsidiary? The chief interjected, momentarily forgetting the president's presence as she directed her query at me. The president, accustomed to seeing the chief in a more composed state, was visibly taken aback, his eyes widening in surprise. I made a heartfelt plea to him. He's my mother's savior, her benefactor, I clarified. What about the president's mother? The chief pressed further. Yes, the elderly lady I rescued a few weeks ago happened to be the president's mother. When he arrived at the hospital entrance and found me waiting for her family, I was surprised. I later learned that he was the one who had immediately come to her aid, calling for an ambulance while others ignored her. I felt he deserved better than being relegated to a subsidiary. So, you personally appointed him as branch manager, the president confirmed. That's correct, he nodded. I had my doubts about my qualifications when I was first appointed as branch manager, I admitted. Coming from a subsidiary, it was a sudden shift to leading at the head office. But after hearing from the president and receiving a call from my father urging me to support the company he had built, I made up my mind. That's precisely why I've appointed him as branch manager. Moving forward, I expect you to show him the respect he deserves and heed his directives, the president admonished the chief sternly before exiting the room. That's the explanation, chief, I reiterated as I faced her once more. You've been mistreating not only your subordinates but also those under your direct supervision. I understand the frustration and pain of being belittled simply because of lacking formal education. No. The chief collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face as her pride took a severe blow. It was no small shock for her to suddenly find herself outranked by someone she had long looked down upon for their perceived lack of education. She even threatened to have me dismissed. With that, my ordeal came to an end. The following day, a comprehensive investigation into the chief's conduct was conducted. Numerous employees and subordinates came forward with accounts of her egregious behavior. As a result, disciplinary action was taken. Upon receiving the news, the chief left the company without a word, her spirits seemingly drained. The chief appeared visibly distraught. Considering her high self-esteem, it was understandable. "By the way, are you certain you want me to replace the chief?" I inquired. "I have full confidence in you," the president affirmed. With the chief dismissed, he appointed the individual who had previously endured her wrath. This employee had a long tenure with the company and showed unwavering dedication to their work. Naturally, I had thoroughly vetted his past performance, knowing he had first-hand experience of the frustrations and mistreatment under former Chief Jones. I knew he wouldn't repeat the same mistakes and would prove to be a compassionate leader who understands his employees' feelings, I explained. As for myself, I endeavored to approach my role from the perspective of the employees, not solely as a branch manager. Drawing from my positive experiences with a subsidiary I had previously worked with, I conducted regular interviews with staff, seeking their input. I also organized training sessions for employees in leadership roles, striving to foster a more supportive environment. Through these efforts, the company's culture gradually improved, resembling the positive atmosphere of the subsidiary where I began my career. Will Smith, I apologize for what happened with Jones, but thanks to your efforts, this company is thriving, the president acknowledged. "Oh, I'm apprehensive," I admitted. At a later meeting, I found myself summoned to the president's office for a casual coffee chat. He wanted to discuss the recent developments in the workplace. I'm not getting any younger, eventually. I envision Will stepping into my role, the president shared. "With all respect, Mr. President, I don't see myself as presidential material," I responded. "Why not? Your father would have wanted the same," he countered. "I aspire to remain aligned with the employees, working alongside them to support the company and engage with our customers. Once in the president's seat, that connection may become strained," I explained. The president frowned at my words before abruptly excusing himself. "You have a unique sense of humor. Most would leap at the opportunity," he remarked upon his departure. Am I considered eccentric? I wondered aloud. No, it's refreshing. It's exactly the kind of mindset we need in a Smith, he assured, giving my shoulder a firm tap. "You have a meeting coming up, don't you? Get back to work."
I filed for divorce. A poor wife is useless after all. My husband shocked me with these words. Moreover, while I was away on a business trip, he not only filed for divorce but also married his lover. He said, "You married me for my wealth, right? I won't fall for that, so give up any claim to the property." As if I married him for his money. When I confronted my indifferent husband, who had always treated me with contempt since our marriage, he started to unravel and ultimately spiraled down to rock bottom. My name is Karen, and I'm 35 years old. My father passed away when I was in kindergarten, and since then my mother raised my sister and me by herself. I was grateful to my mother but always wished I had a father. I dreamed of living happily ever after with my husband, surrounded by children, though I never knew how many. Life on just my mother's earnings was far from wealthy, but we were happy as a family of 3. However, the poverty I grew up with never left me even after I started working and earning a decent salary. When I was single, my grocery shopping centered around discounted items, and I would stock up during sales if the items wouldn't go bad. Eating out was out of the question. I wouldn't even buy convenience store bunto. For drinks, I would bring tea in a thermos. Before I knew it, saving money had become a hobby. I married my husband John 4 years ago. We met through an acquaintance and hit it off. Unlike me, who grew up poor, John was wealthy from a young age, and our views on money and values were completely different. However, I was drawn to his kindness and the new world he showed me. We started dating soon after meeting, and as I was over 30 and eager to get married, we tied the knot in less than a year. We decided to move into my apartment, which was close to both our workplaces. It was a company-subsidized apartment, so the rent was quite cheap, one of the reasons we chose it as our new home. After marriage, I continued paying the rent, and John contributed to other living expenses. This was how our married life began. John had a somewhat traditional view of gender roles, believing women should quit their jobs and take care of the home after marriage while men should support women. I found these views of his cool and masculine at the time. Before our marriage, he suggested I become a homemaker, saying he would support me. He probably thought of me as a domestic woman, good at cooking and cleaning, which made me happy at that moment. However, I loved my job and had important responsibilities at work. I didn't hate household chores, but being a full-time homemaker wasn't an option for me. If I quit my job and became a homemaker, we would have to leave this apartment as it was company subsidized. Moving to a similar apartment would significantly increase our rent and moving costs. Honestly, John's salary wasn't that high. If we had children, our financial needs would increase, and I would inevitably need to keep working. Thinking about our situation, I decided to earn as much as I could while I could. Since I was paying the rent, I felt I needed to continue earning. I subtly brought up these points, including the need to move out of the apartment, in a conversation with John. This was probably the first time I contradicted his opinions. Hey, about you wanting me to be a homemaker, I'll take care of the house, but can I continue working until we have kids? I want to save as much money as we can for now. Are you saying my salary isn't enough? Or do you just want more money to spend? It's not like that. Kids are expensive, and I want to save up for that. I can even use my earnings for our living expenses. It's better to have more money, right? Right. Your annual income is $15,000, right? It's not much, just enough for the rent, but it's better than nothing. It's better than mommy around at home. Yes, but thank you. I'll keep working until we have kids. Of course, I'll take care of the house too. Though I felt uneasy about some parts, I managed to convince him to let me keep working. But in hindsight, this might have upset him. Balancing work and household chores was harder than I expected. My days were incredibly busy. I was a full-time employee, not part-time. I woke up early to prepare breakfast, lunch boxes for both of us, and to do some prep for dinner and tidy up the house when I got home. I prepared dinner, heated the bath, and did laundry after John went to sleep. Honestly, there was barely any time for us as a couple, and I began to wonder if this was really what a marriage should be like. On the other hand, Javanan, who acted like a traditional husband, did absolutely nothing at home. He must have seen how busy I was with household chores, but he would just eat dinner, drink beer, and relax when he got home. He'd bathe alone as soon as it was ready, then go to his room. I wished he would help out a bit, given how hard I was working, but I couldn't say anything, fearing he'd tell me to just quit my job. Despite his lack of help at home, I naively hoped he would change once we had kids. However, our relationship had grown distant, making the prospect of having children unlikely. I decided to discuss it with John. Hey, we should start thinking about having kids, right? Kids? You're quite energetic considering you're tired from work and chores. It's not about that. I want to have children. We haven't been married that long. Isn't it too early for kids? Maybe for you, but I'm already over 30. Women have a limited time to have children. It's getting harder to conceive as I get older. It's almost too late. Then we don't need kids. If we have one, you'll expect me to help, right? You know I'm busy with work. I won't help with child rearing. What? Declaring you won't help with child rearing even before they're born is strange, isn't it? I plan to raise them alone, but shouldn't you at least have the intention to help? It's your child too. Child rearing is your job. I'm working to support the family, so I definitely won't help with the kids. You'll just complain that I don't help and that you're doing it alone, making me the bad guy. You must have been indoctrinated with poverty and lots of kids since birth. We're not poor. We don't need kids. End of discussion. John abruptly ended the conversation and went to his room. Standing alone in the living room, I was overwhelmed by tears. Not only was my wish for children rejected, but also my upbringing was mocked. Following this incident, our relationship deteriorated rapidly, and we hardly spoke anymore. There were no children and barely any communication. Maybe it was time to consider divorce, yet a faint image of my once kind husband lingered in my mind, making me wish we could return to the happy couple we used to be. Since then, I tirelessly juggled work and home responsibilities. I was incredibly busy with various tasks. Eventually, I took on a significant project at work, which meant more business trips and further distance from John. One day, as usual, I told him about an upcoming business trip, but his reaction was unlike any other time. I'll be away on a business trip for about 10 days starting tomorrow. Please take care. Another trip? You're always working hard. Take care, even though you must be tired. He was unexpectedly kind, unlike his usual mocking self. He even said with a smile, "Wait for a big surprise when you get back." I had given up on him and was resolved to a decision internally. However, his smile shook my resolve. Our wedding anniversary was approaching, and I thought maybe he had a surprise for that. Despite everything, I hoped he might have changed his heart. I even considered rethinking my stance if he had truly changed. However, my faint hope was shattered by a major incident. When I returned home 10 days later, I faced the first surprise. The front door wouldn't open. The key didn't fit. As I struggled, John spoke from inside. "Karen, right? Surprised. This is the first surprise. I changed the locks, so your key won't work anymore." "What do you mean?" Why doesn't my key work? Open the door. Why would I let a stranger into my house? I changed the locks, and for your information, we're divorced. That's the second surprise. A poor wife is useless. Divorce. I never signed any papers. How could you even do this? I just forged your signature. I submitted it with a friend's name as a witness, so you're a stranger now. Got it. Understood. Then we need to discuss property division, right? Right? Property division. I had a document for you to sign. I'll let you in this one last time. John finally opened the door. Inside, there was a document for me to sign, waiving my rights to property division. I thought you'd say, give me property division if you want a divorce. Poor people like you probably saw me as rich. You married me for my wealth, right? I won't fall for that, so waive your rights to the property. What? I never even thought about property division. I hadn't even considered divorce. So you'll also waive your rights to property division, right? How much property do you think a poor person like you has? A few thousand in savings at most. I don't need that. I have more assets, so if anyone is doing the dividing, it would be me giving money to you, not the other way around. Don't you get it? Is that so? Well, that doesn't matter. Let's change the document to reflect mutual renunciation of property rights and make it a public document, I retorted stubbornly. Afterward, John redid the document on his computer, deciding to make it a public document. However, it would be some time before we could submit it. I decided to pack my things and leave the house for the moment. As I was leaving, you scorned me until the end. You are poor. I thought about throwing away your belongings while you were on your trip, but you barely had anything. Always wearing the same clothes, typical of the poor. The reason my belongings were few at that time was deliberate, part of my plan. The only unexpected thing was John changing the locks without my knowledge. A few days later, as expected, a panicked John called me. Karen, what have you done? What do you mean? I haven't done anything. Why are you panicking? I have a lot of questions. First, I was told to leave the apartment. Oh, you were still living there. That's not allowed. It's a new month. You're trespassing. Trespassing? But it's my house. Are you okay? Did you forget that was a company apartment I rented? I was the leaseholder, so naturally, you can't live there anymore. That's ridiculous. How could you do this? I can't believe you didn't know. I'm not the one who should be accused of doing things on my own. Didn't I tell you that you can't just change the locks of a rental apartment? It's my house. I can change the locks if I want. Didn't you listen? It was my leased apartment. Even if you were the leaseholder, the owner is the apartment manager. You can't change the locks without informing them. Is that so? Also, I terminated the lease while you were away. You terminated it so early, I was allowed to live there until this month. I was planning to return, but now you've unlawfully altered someone else's property, which could be considered criminal damage. Wait, criminal damage? Is that why the police are at the front door now? I'm too scared to open it. I replied calmly, so the police did come. Don't worry, it's probably not for trespassing or criminal damage. It's better to talk to them. Why do you know about the police? Because I reported you for filing the divorce papers yourself. It seems like you've committed crimes like forgery and fraudulent use of a private document. Divorce papers can be filed by one person, but only with mutual agreement and personal signatures. Since you forged my signature and the witnesses, it's obvious that it's a crime. John seemed unaware of his guilt. I continued pressing further. So the divorce papers you submitted are invalid, and your marriage with Susan can't happen either. How do you know about Susan? Did you think I knew nothing? I had a private detective agency thoroughly investigate your affair with Susan. It was a busy time at work, and coordinating with the agency was tough. Plus, you've even held a grand wedding ceremony while I was supposedly on a business trip. Are you saying your business trip was a lie? Yes, I took leave from work despite being busy to do some research and prepare documents. I knew about you bringing Susan home. It would have been impossible to gather this evidence while working. After I revealed everything, John was speechless and seemed quite downcast, even over the phone. Then he pleaded with me. Please don't tell Susan I'm divorced. Why would I? There's no such fact to tell. Really? Thank you. Are you misunderstanding something? When did you become divorced? That fake divorce paper is invalid, remember. So legally, you're still my husband, not divorced. What? Since you committed adultery while legally my husband, Susan needs to pay compensation. I sent the demand for reparation to her house yesterday by express delivery. She didn't know you were married, right? I can't withdraw the claim at this point. I already knew Susan believed John was single, but I deliberately sent the reparation demand anyway. Since Susan hadn't contacted me yet, she likely hadn't received the letter. It should arrive soon. Should you be on the phone with me when you also have to deal with the police? You're busy. I'll ignore the police. I won't be arrested. I'm going to Susan's house now to get the letter back before she or her family can accept it, he said, hanging up abruptly. He probably went straight to Susan's house to wait for the postman at the front door. I knew it would be futile because the letter was sent as registered mail to Susan only. Even if he waited for the postman, he couldn't receive it. A few hours later, a dispirited John called me. According to him, there was an incident when the postman arrived. Finally, I'll take that envelope. Who are you? You don't live here, right? I'm practically a resident here since I'm married. I have the right to receive the mail. I see, but I can't give you this envelope. It's registered mail for Susan only. What? Give it to me. Absolutely not. If you're so eager, ask Susan for permission. What's going on here? Susan asked as she approached. Oh, John, what's all this noise? What's happening? Susan, this is registered mail for you. This man insisted on taking it. Sorry for the disturbance. Now I'll be on my way. What's this? A demand for reparation. John, you were married. What's going on here? Sorry, it's just, she's an ex-wife from a long time ago. I was embarrassed to say I'm divorced. I'm sorry for keeping it secret. But it's strange, isn't it? We haven't been dating long, and a demand for reparation. If you were divorced before we started dating, there shouldn't be any problem, right? Well, my ex-wife is crazy. Maybe she's demanding reparation out of spite because I got married. That was the excuse he gave, but such a lie was quickly exposed. The envelope included a letter I wrote along with my contact information. Susan called me directly, and in that call, I told her about the affair, the invalid divorce, and that they had a wedding ceremony while he was still married to me. Although they had a wedding ceremony, they hadn't submitted the marriage registration yet. John wanted to submit it on a good luck day, so it was still pending. He probably delayed submitting the marriage registration due to uncertainty about whether the divorce was finalized. After being exposed, John fled from Susan's house and shamelessly contacted me again. I still had something to tell him, so we agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. As soon as I arrived, John said, "Karen, please withdraw the reparation claim. Let's pretend we've been separated for a long time and officially divorced now. I can apologize to Susan for being secretly divorced and maybe cover it up. You think I'm desperate to stay married to you? I was going to file for divorce anyway, but since you cheated, you'll pay reparation. Just trying to extort money from me, huh? Typical of the poor, you have such a poor heart. You're talking nonsense. Depending on my answer, everything can change. There's still an option where we don't divorce. If I say no, you can't reject it, meaning you can't marry Susan and your marital status will be exposed. Fine, I'll pay the reparation. Just divorce me now. Sign here then. About property division. Property division? How much more do you want to take from me? Reparation should be enough. Remember we agreed to waive property division, right? So let's make it official. All right, you're not as bad as I thought. Thank you. We then went to a public notary, made a public document for reparation and property division, and then to the city hall to submit the divorce papers, finalizing our divorce. Relieved, I exchanged final words with John. Glad we don't have to divide property. What are you saying? I'm the one who benefits from that. By the way, you even have assets. After paying me reparation, Susan will also claim damages. She mentioned charging you for the wedding expenses. That's impossible. I'm marrying Susan. She can't claim that. We're divorced now, so there should be no problem. Still living in a fantasy. You committed marriage fraud. You had a wedding while still married. You think Susan still believes you? Marriage fraud? That's ridiculous. Susan will believe me. Believe that if you want. I heard from Susan directly. Also, weren't the guests at your wedding paid actors? You still owe them. You knew about that. I haven't paid them yet. What does it matter to you? You could have just taken property division and been better off. That's what I wanted to tell you. Even if we had divided property, you would have benefited more. What are you talking about, poor woman? Your family is poor and you only make $15,000 a year, right? Even if you got a raise, it would be barely $20,000. You don't have any property. You keep calling me poor, so I thought you might be mistaken. Yes, my salary is indeed $15,000, but you know I work for a foreign company, right? It seems you have no interest in me, but I became a director of the American branch. It's not $115,000 per year, but per month, $155,000 per month. So that's an annual income of $100,000. You're still bad with numbers. How do you manage to keep a job? It's $1.8 million a year. $1.8 million? That can't be true. Of course it is. I haven't had the chance to spend such an amount, so I've been saving it for the future. The savings from before our marriage aren't part of the property division, but there's still a considerable amount since our marriage. I could have received half of that in the property division. You were my destiny after all. I'll get the divorce papers corrected. Are you okay? After all the contempt, you think I'd gladly undo the divorce? If you have that much money, you don't need to claim reparation, right? It's just a small amount for you. He who laughs at a cent will weep for a cent. This reparation is for the mental anguish you caused me. Honestly, I'd like to claim more. Since we've made it official, make sure to pay it, even in installments. I'll be penniless. Also, don't go back to that apartment. Your belongings should have been moved to your parents' house by now. You thought I had few belongings, but that was because I had already moved most of them. Were you that indifferent to me? I can't have so little, so I have to go back to my parents' house. They don't know anything yet, do they? Let me explain. Don't say anything. I've already told them everything. It's only right to explain why we're divorcing. Oh, and your father said not to ever step over our threshold again. So I have nowhere to go. He collapsed, and I left the cafe. Later, I heard he caused trouble at the police station. Despite my advice, he went back to the apartment and sat there aimlessly until the manager called the police. He was taken away, though I'm not sure if it was for obstructing public duties, trespassing, or for the falsified divorce papers. Eventually, his parents took responsibility for him. After talking with me and learning about Susan, they decided that apologizing and paying damages to Susan's family came first. They went to Susan's house, knelt in front of her family, and settled everything without pressing charges for marriage fraud, even paying for the wedding expenses. I had expected them to sue, so it was disappointing they didn't. So I decided to pursue legal action against John for forging the divorce papers. John offered a settlement, but I didn't withdraw the lawsuit. I didn't want him to think everything could be solved with money. I wanted him to understand the gravity of his actions. Even if it cost time and money, I left everything to my lawyer, so it wasn't too burdensome for me. Dan was exposed for his actions and the marriage fraud at his company, leading to his eventual firing. He ended up living at his parents' home, working all day at a relative's construction company. His father took all his earnings, leaving him with no income. I thought his parents wouldn't abandon him, but they were stricter than I expected. They paid my reparation and Susan's compensation, planning to make him work like a horse until he repaid everything. He lived in a shed-like place with no electricity, receiving only $5 per day for food deducted from his salary. They planned to disown and kick him out once he repaid everything. A harsh fate. After years of hard work, I was offered a position at the head office abroad, so I moved overseas after the divorce was finalized. I worried John might come to me for help or harbor resentment, but moving abroad alleviated those concerns. I thought work would be my partner for a while, but soon I found a new relationship. I'm now dating a foreign executive at our head office, and I'm pregnant with plans to marry soon. I told him everything about my past and my ex-husband, and he's understanding. I'll take maternity leave and plan to return to work later, supported by him. He's enthusiastic about taking paternity leave and co-parenting, showing a different cultural perspective. After being tormented by my ex-husband, I finally feel I'm grasping true happiness and confidence in building the happy family I always dreamed of. Many suffer due to selfish spouses. While divorce isn't always the right choice, enduring silence isn't a virtue. It's important to know that honest discussions can lead to resolutions, and sometimes divorce